Hello and welcome to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and we'll be talking today with Arlington County Board Chair Christian Dorsey, as well as our newest board member, Matt DeFerranti, about actions the board took at its February meeting and what those actions mean for you, your neighborhood, and our community. Christian, Matt, welcome to County Board Wrap-Up.
Hi, Kara.
Let's dive right in. The manager presented the budget for the fiscal year 2020. Where do we stand now?
Well, we're in a much better place, Kara, than we were last November when the manager started looking at preliminary projections for what the 2020 budget would be. And at that time, he was looking at potentially as high as a $35 million gap. And we didn't even know what we were going to get from Arlington Public Schools. So we were looking at a really realistic scenario where we would have to substantially cut county services, the things that we all care about that make Arlington function well. Fortunately, those doomsday scenarios have not materialized. We've had better than expected revenue growth, primarily due to the strength of the commercial sector, which we haven't been able to say in Arlington for a few years. And so the manager was able to put together a budget that adhered to the guidance that he got from the board last fall to provide for the services that we value and that we care about, with a possible raising of the tax rate to accommodate new school programs that are going to be coming online, as well as some of the issues that we have with metro funding and other strong county priorities.
And so where do we go from here? I know there will be some hearings about that proposed tax rate increase.
Indeed. So the manager introduced his budget to the world on February 21st, and then 48 hours later, we had to advertise a tax rate.
Right.
So the board decided that we would give ourselves maximum flexibility to truly have a budget process where we could hear from the community about their priorities and values, including the public schools, which have not yet released their budget. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to accommodate all particular needs, and so we set an upper bound of raising the tax rate 2.75 cents. And our hope, I think I can speak for the entire board, is to drive that as low as we possibly can through an earnest engagement with the community over the next couple of months.
And so through these work sessions, that kind of thing, do you expect to see some back and forth and that kind of thing through the process here?
Absolutely. I'm fully hoping for that sort of back and forth, and I think it's necessary. I think you mentioned metro as a key variable that we didn't quite have, and I think the schools was a shared concern of the entire board as well. You want to make sure you can make the investments that are necessary, but also bring down that tax rate. So I think it's really important for folks to understand the process here, that you advertise early and then you have the full discussion that is so important, so we can balance the community's needs and drive down that rate as much as possible.
You hear a lot from the community, and that Arlington is such an affluent community. We're hearing all this great news about new business coming in. Why are we still having these lean economic times for this budget?
Well, one, the big economic development story of Amazon has yet to materialize, even though it seems like we've been talking about it forever. But
a couple of months.
No Amazon employees have set up shop in Arlington as of yet. And because their build up and build out is gradual, we're really not expecting to see any of that impact on our budgets in terms of positive revenues until fiscal year 2022. But that said, part of the reason this gap narrowed significantly was due to unexpected strength in the commercial real estate market. So we're already seeing some positive economic revenue signs, which are good news for the community. And I recognize whenever you advertise a tax rate increase, which means more money from people, that's something that we don't do lightly. For some people, I'm sure they're able to accommodate this easily within their own household budgets. And for other people, it's going to be a strain. So that's why it's important for this budget process for us to really scrub what the manager has proposed with as much diligence as we can to make sure our basic programs and services are right, and then to make sure we're adequately funding the things that are necessary to provide good opportunities for everyone.
And how can Arlingtonians give their input on the budget process, some perhaps programs or services they feel strongly about?
All of our engagement channels are open, and we even have more engagement channels during budget season. So People can send an email to countyboard@arlingtonva.us. That's one way to just share your thoughts about proposals that you've heard. We do have these work sessions, which we'll be having, I think about 12 or so over the next 2 months, and those are ones that the public can't participate in, but they can learn more about different department priorities within the budget. And then we also have an April 2nd budget hearing where people can come and testify on budget items, and then an April 4th hearing on the tax rate where people can come and testify on that.
Specifically on that.
And I think there's, of course, the usual mechanisms. There's open door Mondays, and already this morning I had a call with a resident who had some concerns and wanted to talk about the budget. And I think all of us are open to those conversations, and in fact, look forward to them. That's part of why we have this period of conversation, so we can hear everybody's input and then balance and try and make the best decisions for the community as a whole.
Well, I know we'll be discussing this in both March and April as we continue through the process. But for now, let's move on. I know the board took some actions this month on the child care initiative, which is something we've talked about for a little while now. Let's take a step back there. Let's remind our viewers what this initiative is looking to accomplish, why it's needed, that kind of thing.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I've been thrilled to, as we've come on the board, to see all the work that my colleagues have done on this, and certainly Katie and Crystal and Christian have done a lot of work, but accessibility and affordability are two key issues. And if you look just in the analysis that we heard in the last board meeting and over the past month, Arlington's costs are higher and there are fewer slots available than many of the surrounding communities. So I really think, and I think Libby Garvey mentioned, this is sort of a textbook example of the way that things can work when stakeholders engage, when the board leads, just having come together. And this is the first part of a two-step process. It was just the request to advertise this time, but I did think it was a good step forward, and you've been working on it for some time.
Yeah, and we have this initiative that's divided into different phases. So this first phase was really to look at what are the statutory barriers that actually prevent more child care slots becoming available. I mean, we're trying to get at this issue of supply. And, I'm happy to say that we were able to uncover lots of potential capacity to add more child care slots in Arlington, which will help alleviate the waiting lists and people being shut out. Should also help affordability. If you just put more supply out there, you perhaps make it more affordable for all, and it doesn't cost the public a dime. These are zoning ordinance changes.
That's a win-win right
It's
there.
a win-win. So for this phase one, I'm really thrilled that we were able to get at those structural barriers which were preventing more child care from being available. And this is so important for everybody all through the income ladder in Arlington. People who are lowest income are obviously most affected, but we see this reverberate even to higher income families. And what we see are dynamics where a parent has to be out of the labor force even though they would like to be in the labor force because childcare is so expensive. And if we can help with that in any way, we can unlock greater potential for families and for the community.
Okay, so where do we go from here? You said it's just the first phase. What's really the timeline? What are we looking at here?
So I think we expect to see phase two sometime this calendar year in 2019, and then phase three maybe beyond. But.
Yeah, no, that's my sense of it. With the specifics, at our next board meeting, we'll be taking up and finishing the process with respect to phase one. But phase two, I believe, is later this year. I think these can be small adjustments in zoning that can change from 9 to 12 students, for example, who can attend a child care facility. But those are very real, and I think what you articulated, Christian, is sort of, and Libby has described it too, this is related to how real economic opportunity can be for families. And so in that way, I'd say it's a sliver of what makes the American dream more possible for more people.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll talk about a redevelopment planned for Washington Boulevard, where the American Legion post has stood for decades, as well as an extreme makeover of sorts coming to a Ballston Park. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Kara O'Donnell, host of County Board Wrap-Up, and with me today are County Board Chair Christian Dorsey, as well as Board Member Matt DiFerranti, giving us a little bit of insight into the key decisions the County Board took at its February meeting. Now, let's talk about the American Legion site. Now, the American Legion has been on Washington Boulevard for years.
70 years.
But the board took some action that we're going to see some changes there. What are we talking about here?
Well, you know, the great thing is in Arlington, we always are figuring out how to efficiently use our land, our limited land. It's our most valuable commodity. So in order to make everything fit and to actually create new opportunities, we've got to get creative. And I have to say that the American Legion and their development partner, the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, came up with a great concept to ensure that the Legion could continue to serve America's veterans. They had an aging facility that would require reinvestment in order to work. That's a big lift for them. So they brought in a development partner who could envision and create a place for the Legion to continue while providing 160 units of, in this case, affordable housing, half of which is going to have a veterans preference.
Oh, wow.
So that we can serve America's lower income veterans, people who have given so much to us, who we found an innovative way to give back to them the gift of an affordable home.
Now, that site is also pretty close, what, with maybe a quarter mile tops from a metro station.
That's right.
How unusual is that, to have that much affordable housing stock that close to metro?
Well, I think the whole project seemed fairly unique in that, you know, the coming together with the Legion. I hope this is a template for other places across the country, but you know, I don't know that there are other instances where such a site is so close to metro that there's a real possibility for close public transportation that can make it even more accessible. I just think this is a great project because you know, serving those who served is so critical, and now here we're putting it into our values directly by moving forward with the project. And the testimony that we heard from all different folks was just really impressive, and there's some balancing. We won't say that everyone was thrilled, but everyone said some concerns, even those close. Most everyone said some real concerns, but still want to move forward.
Okay.
And the ability to serve so many veterans and so many of our community is a great part of the project.
The recognition that a concept like this is very well serving for the community. Now, what kind of public process do we look at for this type of site before we would get started with it?
So there's actually been a lot of public process leading up to it. So before we even got to the position of having a concrete proposal for what the building should look like and how it should operate, we went through what we call a GLUP study process, a general land use study process, where we looked at the entire site that surrounds the American Legion development parcel, which also includes the YMCA, as well as some other you know, commercial strip office buildings or retail stores. And we looked at, well, what would this look like when these areas redevelop? And we created some modeling with the community on the massing and the density. And so that really led to this proposal for the Legion site, which very much comported with the plan, which is a good thing. So the community had already had a chance to work through many of the big issues. And now this process, which included, I think, 3 meetings with the community, looking intensely at the design and where things would fit and flow and the surrounding street network. Took a little bit of time, but relatively smooth. And from this point, it's just a matter of construction, and we'll probably see this building come online a couple of years from now.
Okay, very exciting. And finally, you know, the project is right next to some single-family homes. Did you hear a lot? Did you get input from that community?
We sure did. We got input, and I think there's a real commitment to work with the community to seek to address as many of those concerns as possible. I also think you know, it's just important to kind of remember 2 components of the project. One is there's a lot of leveraging that is going on. We're putting in some funding, but we're also seeking, you know, there'll be funding that is for this project that'll come from the state. And then I think it's important to just remember that to prevent homelessness, serving that low-income households and families that are have a little more than to be directly at risk of nearness, but are close, is something that we have to do. So I think that's key.
Okay, I think we
Hearing from those community stakeholders was really important because there's some ways in which this is a much better development than maybe it would have been otherwise. So the location of the garage where people are going to enter the building was shifted in order to make sure it was complementary to the existing neighborhood. Okay. And then even as cars exit that garage, the provision of a fence so that headlight glare doesn't actually shine into people's homes, a landscaping plan that's going to provide an appropriate buffer between, you know, a single dwelling use and a multifamily use with Legion activity on the ground floor. There are lots of ways in which this has been enhanced, and I think it's going to be a really harmonious project once it's all complete.
Okay, very interesting there. Now, and also in Ballston, the board approved a contract to give a park a makeover,
yeah,
as so to speak. So what is in store for Mosaic Park here in the future?
Mosaic Park. This is something that has been in the public consciousness for quite a long
Yes.
time, long before
Yes,
Matt or
that's
I
right.
were on the board or even thought about it. But we are moving forward now with the resources available, most of which don't even come from public funds, but come from a transfer of development rights, to do a really interesting park that's got traditional playground features, but lots of casual use features that will, as we discussed on Tuesday night, which will include possibilities for habitats for pollinators that are native, right?
Okay.
Native plants that will attract those pollinators, which are unfortunately being threatened for a variety of reasons. We can create a little bit of a habitat for that here in the middle of Ballston.
Okay. Now, you did mention the transfer of development rights. For those who aren't familiar with the term, can we go back, just kind of explain a little bit about what that means as opposed to traditional public funding?
Yeah, so, you know, we talk about density a lot in Arlington, and sometimes if someone doesn't build up to their fullest allowable density, they still have value in their property. And if they commit not to wanting to use that in perpetuity, we can transfer that density to other appropriate sites where people may not necessarily have earned the amount of density they might need to make something work, but it's still appropriate with the general plans for that level of density to be in place. So that's a tool that allows for actually real investments to be made. And this was a case where the sale of density rights enabled us to have this park that's going to be available for the wider Ballston community, a place where, you know, you can't have enough green space. So this is a welcome addition.
Yeah, and I think, so, you know, that's a couple of things that strike me as I came kind of late to the Mosaic Park story is, you know, this is a lot of private sector funding that is essentially being able to help us here. And then there's also the component that there was some tweaking to bring this a little down in terms of the cost. And then it's, you know, it's a project in a part of the county where we definitely need more parks and open space. So as I managed to find a half hour a couple of weeks ago to drive and see the property, it just seems like an ideal space for this sort of amenity for the community.
All right. Well, we will end it on that note, and that brings us to the end of another County Board wrap-up. Thank you to Christian and Matt for joining us and walking us through some of the many items that came before the board at this month's meeting. Next month, the board will be considering the Amazon incentives package and a host of other issues. Remember, all of the county board meetings are open to the public and live streamed and archived on our website. That's arlingtonva.us, and just search County Board. And if you want to tell us what you think about these and other issues, visit the county website at topics.arlingtonva.us/engage. Thanks for joining us today for County Board Wrap Up. I'm Kara O'Donnell. We'll see you next month.